Welcome to the KidMin podcast with Dr. Val and Dr. Virginia, where we talk about everything KidMin
and pull back the curtain on some of the surprises and challenges in children's ministry that nobody prepares you for.
I'm Dr. Val, and together we have over 45 years of experience in children's ministry.
I'm Dr. Virginia. Valerie and I met over 10 years ago in our doctoral program at Southeastern Baptist Theological Seminary. We are excited to share with you all the great stuff that we have picked up over the years. We want to minister to you, the children's minister.
Welcome, friends. Thank you so much for joining us today. I could not be more excited about the topic for our conversation today, Dr. Virginia. I'm such an education nerd anyway. But when we talk about curriculum and resources and materials and developing content for children to learn, I just get super excited.
Yes. And this is one of those just perennial, always going to be there questions within children's ministry. I see it a lot in, on social media and children's ministry groups, just always asking that question, saying, there are so many resources, materials, options out there. Right. How do I even begin to choose what to use in my ministry? And so hopefully today we can talk through some questions, some ideas, some concepts that can help you try to answer that of like, how do I even choose? What do I even pick? Just to help guide those thoughts and considerations.
Oh, for sure. I think that was probably always one of the most asked questions, especially as I was consulting with churches. They would say, what is the best curriculum? What is the best material to use? What are the best publishing houses? And and I think that it just comes from one of my biggest pet peeves. And we were talking about this earlier because we were talking about naming the episode, and I was like, oh, this is my pet peeve. For when I was a principal at a Christian school, but also as I've worked with churches over the years, understanding the difference between curriculum and resources is something that a lot of people tend to get caught up in. And so I thought that we would kind of start off today by just talking about what the difference is and the philosophy that comes when you are trying to choose a material to use in your children's ministry. And so first is to kind of explain that the curriculum is actually your planned experiences for your students. So that means that your curriculum is how you sit down and you think through what are the things that I want my children to learn in this particular class. So if we're talking about Bible study and we're talking about their Bible study on Sunday mornings, you're going to look at each grade level and you're going to decide your curriculum based on what you want the kids to learn. And so that's going to be something that we call a scope and sequence. And basically what a scope and sequence is just saying, these are the things that I want a first grader to begin to learn when they first come into the classroom and what I want them to know by the time they move into second grade. This is what I want second graders to learn by the time they move into third grade. And so you're looking at, if I have a child that comes into my children's ministry as a kindergartner, what do I want them to learn and know by the time they leave to go into the preteen ministry? There is not going to be one material that's going to be able to cover everything you're going to set up in your curriculum.
Yeah.
Because it's just not possible.
Right.
One publisher cannot provide for you absolutely everything in one resource that's going to cover everything you're hoping your children are going to learn from kindergarten through sixth grade. But the way that you decide which publisher you're going to purchase resources from, what instructional materials are you going to purchase, what textbooks, what study books are you going to use to support your curriculum? That's based on what you want the kids to learn. And
Mhm.
so it's a different way of looking at it, as opposed to saying, like, for example, let's say that you use material from group or from Lifeway, and someone asks you, what is your curriculum? It's not group or Lifeway. Your curriculum is what you've decided that you want to focus on. What is your goal for what your kids are going to learn, if that makes sense?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because that should be the starting point of, what are my goals for my time with these kids?
Right.
And to almost in some ways zoom it out even farther, we have a great podcast episode about creating mission and vision for your children's ministry.
Right.
And so if you think about it almost as like a funnel, like, okay, we've got this mission and vision for our children's ministry, for our children. That informs our curriculum and our decisions on what goes in the classroom.
Right.
That mission and vision informs our decisions on particular ministries, particular events, particular things that we're going to emphasize. And so, zooming out from just looking at individual resources and pulling it back and saying, okay, what are our goals?
Right.
What are our objectives?
Right.
to talk like a teacher,
Right.
for this particular ministry time on a Sunday morning or on a Wednesday night? How are those goals different for those two times?
Right.
For just like what you're saying, each grade or each age. And then from there, evaluating the options for different materials and different resources to help move your kids and move your ministry along towards meeting those goals.
Right.
And so in that podcast episode, which we can link in our notes, our interview with Shelley was great because she talked about, having mission and vision for the children's ministry, and then using that to shape decisions on, what ministry was going to look like on Sunday mornings, on Wednesday nights. And so then from there, what materials, what resources do we want to consider for Sunday mornings and for Wednesday nights? And so, zooming out from this publisher or that publisher,
Right.
what are your goals?
Right. Right. And when you're doing this, we're not saying that you have to write your own material. That's not what we're saying here, because writing material for children is very time consuming. It's very challenging. It's not something that's just super simple to do. What we're saying is you are looking at the material in a broader sense. So you're not writing what they're learning each week, but what you are doing is you're sitting down and you're thinking about your long-term goals for your kids. What do you feel like is the most important? And then how does this material that's already been written fit my goals to the best? Like, what are the things that you have to think about when you are looking at material? Because there's so much more involved than just the activities that are offered. Hopefully today, as we work through some things with you, it will help you to see it's not really as overwhelming as it sounds when we say you need to sit down and set goals. You need to sit down and kind of create a scope and sequence. That's not as overwhelming as you might think it would be. But there are things that you do need to think about as you begin your search for new material, if that's where you are in your ministry right now, or if you're wanting to see if the material that you're currently using is best meeting your needs.
Amen. And one of the things that we always say is, don't feel like you have to reinvent the wheel.
Right.
And so our questions that we're discussing today, again, are to help you evaluate and consider these materials. So one, what are your goals?
Right.
What is your curriculum? What do you want kids to come out of your ministry knowing? Two, as you're looking at pre-existent materials and, providers and publishers, considering where does this provider, where does this publisher fall on the theological spectrum? because each material, everyone writes from a certain perspective. And so being aware of, the theological background of this publisher, of this material, is going to help you in making that decision. And so one of the examples that I use is just, Lifeway. We talk a lot about Lifeway. And there are lots of wonderful publishers out there, but a lot of people don't necessarily realize that Lifeway is the publishing arm of the Southern Baptist Convention. And so a lot of Lifeway materials are very usable, very user-friendly for a variety of denominations and backgrounds. But that is being aware and understanding the theological background of a publisher is very important.
Right. Well, and that's one of the things that I always ask a church when we start through this process. You start off with the goal for your curriculum. Like I said, the goal for what you have set for your kids. And I always ask, are you, think about your particular denomination, your church. Are you a non-denominational church? Are you Southern Baptist? Are you Methodist? Are you, fill in the blank here. Where do you fall in that, in theology, and how important is doctrine to you? How important is teaching doctrine to the children? Because this is what I've always said. It's one thing. The reason why I always tell people that writing material for children is more difficult than we think it is. It's not just coming up with fun activities and games. Writing theologically, doctrinally sound material for children that's age appropriate and that fits where they are in their learning abilities is not a super simple thing to do. It takes a lot of time and a lot of training and a lot of nuance.
Yes.
Because theological concepts are so complicated. And we as adults, especially if you've grown up in church, you have known these theological concepts from your denomination for your whole entire life, and it just becomes second nature to you. But for a first grader or a third grader or a fifth grader, it's more difficult for them to grasp and understand. So you have to be mindful of the way that you're presenting these big theological concepts to children. There are certain things that they can get and certain things that they can't get. I've always said, we are very quick to use church terms, salvation, propitiation of sin, like all of these, these church terminologies that we are very quick to use, not realizing that kids can't always understand exactly what that means. And so it's easier to add activities and fun games to material than it is to have to add your doctrine into your material. So if your church doctrine is very important to you, then it is important for you to really consider material that's provided by your denomination, because they have taken that time to really look at your doctrinal beliefs and include that into the material that they're providing for you. Even if you don't think the activities and things are so great from that material, it's easier to add the games than it is to add the doctrinal teaching.
Agreed.
So that's where you really have to decide your goal for your curriculum. Are you wanting to teach doctrine? Are you wanting to teach Bible skills? Because not all material that is coming out right now actually has Bible skills, learning the books of the Bible, learning Bible verses, learning how to use a physical Bible is not always included in all material now. So are Bible skills important to you? Is that something that you want to be sure to include? Are activities really important for you? Are games and active learning and, learning styles, is that something that really matters to you, that they're meeting those needs? Or do you have volunteers that take a lot of time to prepare? Or do they not take a lot of time to prepare? So is one of your goals that you need something that can be put together quickly and easily, or something that takes prep? So those are the kind of goals you have to start off with. What do I want my children's ministry to look like? What do I want my kids to learn? And so you begin with those questions and then you move forward.
And, and it's funny to you talking about, the difficulty of taking big theological concepts and explaining them simply, which is, different than, I hate it when people use the phrase, quote unquote, like dumbing it down. I'm like, no.
Right. No.
We don't do that.
We don't.
We take a complicated concept and explain it simply, which requires knowing that concept inside and out, backwards and forwards, being an expert in it.
Right.
And so talking about, just sort of thinking through, teaching doctrine to kids at very young ages. And so recently, I was reading through with my daughter with her little toddler picture Bible, and we were reading about Jesus being baptized by John the Baptist. And of course, there's like this little picture of like Jesus and John, and they're standing in the river. And my daughter, my 3-year-old, asked me, she's like, "What is baptized?" And I'm like, let me explain baptism to a 3-year-old who's always been in the nursery, who has yet to really see it. I mean, I think we, watched a video that came with our curriculum of Jesus being baptized, but beyond that, has never really seen baptism. Let me start explaining this just as a parent to my 3-year-old child who's asking me about this. And so, I kind of explain the mechanics of it, that, they put you under the water, and that it represents, it reminds us of when Jesus died and came back to life. And, I go through all this, and she looks at me and says, "What's baptism?" At the end of the explanation.
Because, it's going to take some time.
It does. Right. And I'm trying, and it just perfectly illustrates the concept that communicating doctrinal truth to children is not easy. And so finding theologically aligned curriculum is so valuable. Yeah.
It is. And that is a perfect example of something that I had in my curriculum for my children's ministry, is that when I served at a church where we had a children's church. So our kids were in children's church in a service that was just for the children. But when there was a baptism in the sanctuary, we would bring the kids into the sanctuary for the baptism. And then we usually, when they do a baptism, or at least most churches where I've been, there's usually like a song, a hymn that's sung after, that gives the pastor time to get, changed.
Get his waders off. Yeah.
So it always worked out pretty well for, then we would take the kids back, to children's worship during that song. So we didn't interrupt the service, but we had a little area that was cordoned off for the kids, and we would bring them in, because I wanted them to see baptisms. And you don't, if you are in preschool, if you are in children's church, you're not going to see that. So that was an important part of what I made sure we did to plan. And then even I was at a church one that was so large, we couldn't really do that, but we did have televisions in all of the classrooms. So we would broadcast because that church was large enough that it was filming, and it would so we would show the baptism in the classroom. So I always made a point of making sure that the kids would see the doctrinal things that were important for our denomination, because that was something that was very important. I wanted them to see the Lord's Supper sometimes. I wanted them to be involved with their church, to sit with their families during big events, so that was part of it. So that's kind of what we were talking about earlier with that's part of how you plan, because you're not going to get that kind of thing from a material from a publisher. I mean, you will see like the video of Jesus being baptized, but they're not going to be in the sanctuary with the church family for an actual baptism just through paper material.
Right. And so another thing, as you are looking at published curriculum, publishers typically make available their scope and sequence for their materials.
Yes.
So usually you can go online and find a 1 to 4 year cycle for their materials, for their written materials of the topics, the Bible stories, whatever it is that they are going to cover in this particular cycle of the material. And so again, some curriculums are on a 1-year cycle, some are up to a 4-year cycle that I've seen.
Right.
But it will lay out for you the coming, topics, the coming Bible lessons for you to be able to see, how they have it planned longer term.
Right. Well, and I think that's really important for you to help as you think through, because one of the biggest complaints that you usually are going to receive from a teacher is that they feel like they do the same Bible stories over and over and over again. But the thing that you have to help them remember is that their kids are not the same kids that they have year after year after year.
Yeah.
And so if you're looking at a publisher that has a scope and sequence where in first grade, these are the stories that they are going to be studying, then next year, those are going to, there's going to be things that move and that change, but typically they're going to go back over those stories again the next year for the new first graders coming in, because the kindergartners didn't get those stories. So you have to help teachers realize that even though it may seem boring to them because they've taught the same stories over and over again, they have to be able to see your scope and sequence to be able to say, well, that's because first graders are learning these concepts. Second graders are learning these concepts. So, they're pulling, the stories and also because there are certain Bible stories that are age appropriate, and some Bible stories, that are age appropriate for older children. And so you have to think through the scope and sequence. What is your cycle? How are you looking at it? There are some publishers that use like a chronological scope and sequence, and some are more topical. And that's where you have to decide, because I have also heard sometimes teachers will say, oh, wow, we've been in the Old Testament
for forever.
Yeah. There's only so many battle stories that my kids can handle. And so you have to decide, exactly what are you looking for when you are looking at this? Are you wanting to think more topically and skip through Old and New Testament, or are you wanting to tell a story from Genesis to Revelation? You want to think through, how does the material move through the Bible?
And what's funny, talking about the complaint of hearing like, oh, we just keep doing the same Bible stories. For me, I feel like I would get that complaint at times whenever we were using topical curriculum.
Right.
And then using chronological curriculum, I'm more likely to get the opposite complaint of like, oh, why aren't we doing that in this cycle?
Right.
Like we're going through, we're looping back through the Bible over and over again. Well, why aren't we doing that one? Why are we doing this one? Why aren't we doing that story? And so just reminding them, be like, well, we did Daniel in the lion's den in the last cycle through. Now we're doing, Daniel whenever he was a young boy, not eating the king's food. And so, in these different cycles and these different sweeps through the Bible, they are picking up different Bible stories, in different cycles. And so it's funny because I've gotten complaints on like both end of the spectrum about that. And why are we doing this again? Why aren't we doing that again? So
I will never forget, because I had a comment one time in a conference that I was leading, because the person in the conference heard me say that I would write for a particular publisher at the time. And so they were saying, why don't we ever get any new Bible stories? And so, I said, well, I know this was a little sarcastic, but I was like, well, God hasn't really given us any new Bible stories for a while. Yeah, and I kind of say that to be funny and to lighten the moment a minute, but also it's just that idea of, what the Bible stories we have are the ones that we have, and there is a very specific age appropriateness for certain stories, things that kids can understand and things that kids are not quite able to understand. And so it does make it feel like, okay, if you've been teaching for a lot of years, you do feel like, wow, I have taught, if you've taught first grade for 20 years, you've taught the same stories a lot. But there's a purpose and a reason for it. Like that, there's a lot of thought that has gone into how this material has been written. And so repetition is great for kids. Kids love repetition. Adults,
Sure.
not so much. So,
Right.
it is, you do get those comments from teachers a lot
Right.
where you kind of have to go, okay, kind of think logically through this for just a minute.
And I would add too, there are certain theological milestones throughout Scripture that are just really important to the story of redemption and God
Right.
sending Jesus. I mean, Adam and Eve and creation and the fall into sin, Abraham and the Abrahamic covenant that God's going to send a savior through Abraham's line, or going to send a blessing for the whole world through Abraham's line. Like David and God's promise to David that there will be someone coming from his line who will be an eternal king. Like, there are certain points throughout Scripture that are just like really significant. All of Scripture is important. All of it is valuable. All of it instructs us.
Right.
But there are these certain sort of markers throughout Scripture that especially like prepare us to understand what God is doing throughout history, how God is redeeming his people, how God is sending Jesus. And so you will see, for theological reasons as well, certain things highlighted and reinforced and called back on and really coming up to the surface pretty frequently because of the role that some of these promises and some of these stories play just in the Bible as a whole.
Right.
So there's theological reasons as well to why certain things just come up a lot.
Keep coming around.
So, yeah.
And I think that falls back on another thing that you have to look at when you're making these decisions, is that you have to look at the community that you're teaching. What are your goals for the different times you have children in your ministry?
Yes.
On Sunday mornings, do you have a lot of visitors that maybe have never been to church before? And so they don't know a lot about the Bible. And so you're just wanting to stay very basic, telling them about Jesus and salvation kind of information. On Wednesday nights, if you do have a Wednesday night program and the kids are coming, are those basically your kids that are very faithful and that have been there for years? So do you want to look at something a little more challenging so that you can move up a little bit on their understanding and what their level is, because they've had that biblical background a little bit more. So you look at your community as well when you're making these decisions and think about, what do you want to focus on? Because you do want to remember that, especially if kids don't, a lot of times teachers will walk into a classroom assuming that all kids know who David and Goliath are, even at 5th grade. And that's just not true. There's too many kids that are coming to church for the very first time and that have never heard anything about the Bible at all. I think I've told that story before in our vacation Bible school episode, where we had a 5th grader literally raise their hands during VBS and say, "You keep saying God, who is God?" They had never been to church before, and they literally didn't have a concept of who God is. They didn't know who they were referring to. So in the classroom. So it's, it took a minute, because it's like, wait, you would expect an older child to know who God is. But if they aren't exposed in any way, they may not have ever really considered what people are talking about when they mention God.
Right. They may have only heard it as a swear word.
Right. So you don't know people's experience or their understanding level or what they've comprehended or processed. And so, you want to be mindful of that. So that's one of those things that you're thinking about when you're choosing material. You're thinking, what exactly do I want my focus to be?
And as we are looking at different materials and considering different options, also looking at the material with an eye for the teaching style of the material, the supplemental materials that it has, because different materials from different publishers are going to be kind of set up to be taught in different ways. Is this set up to be more lecture style? Is this set up for you to use centers? Is this very technology integrated with videos, or even, like little games that you can do? So understanding sort of the basic teaching style of how it's meant to be taught, and the supplemental materials that it does or does not have.
Well, and that's one of the things, and we mentioned this quickly earlier, but I think it's important for us to talk about it, is that teaching styles for volunteers have changed over the years.
Mm-hmm.
When I started
Yeah.
serving in church as a volunteer back in the dark ages, back in the 80s when, it was like, when you committed to being a volunteer, you were
Mhm.
committing to creating all, like putting together all your activities and coming in
Right.
the night before and setting up your classroom. And,
Mhm.
it was, the teachers would come in during the week to change bulletin boards and to do, that was
Right.
like just part of the expected responsibilities for the classroom
Mhm.
teacher. And that's
Mhm.
changed
Yeah.
dramatically over the years.
Mhm.
Now,
Mhm.
a lot of churches provide all of that for their teachers so
Mhm.
that their volunteers just walk into the classroom on Sunday morning
Mhm.
and everything is laid out for them, everything is
Mhm.
provided for them, and everything is out there. And there's every opportunity in between to find different styles in churches
Mhm.
now.
Mhm.
Everything from the teacher does still stay super involved and comes in the night before,
Mhm.
or you have these that you hand them a little bucket as they walk into the classroom. And so you really have to look at the material to see how is it designed.
Mhm.
And I don't want to get into
Right.
that because I'll hear a lot of people say, well, that's old school. No, it's a different style
Mhm.
of material for a different teaching style because there are
Right.
still churches out there. I've seen
Right.
them, I've visited them, I've worked with them that still do have teachers that are super involved
Right.
in
Right.
preparing their material for Sunday morning. But then there are a lot of churches that don't. So you really have to, so one's not better than the other. It's just one meets your church's needs more. So you have
Mhm.
to look at your volunteers. How involved are they? What kind of time do they have?
Mhm.
Are they going to prepare or do you need to prepare for them? And different
Mhm.
types of publishers provide different materials based on that.
Mhm.
Are your teachers still wanting a book in their hands
Mhm.
or can you email them the material? So do you want an electronic version of your material or do you want it all to be hands-on or do you need a little bit of both?
Mhm.
Different publishers offer you different things. So you have to decide, is that a priority for you, how the material is disseminated to your volunteers?
Mhm. And it depends too, I think, on your volunteer structure within your ministry. And so I
Mhm.
would say within our ministry, we have a little bit of both. We have our small group Sunday school teachers who they are responsible. So they get the book, they get the materials, they get the stuff,
Mhm.
and they plan their own lessons. And they are the kind of volunteers who, I mean, they know that whenever they sign up, that is an
Right.
expectation and understanding that whenever they agree to serve, they're going to be a traditional Sunday
Right.
school teacher because it's a Sunday school hour.
Right.
But then during our worship hour, we have rotating once a month volunteers.
Right.
And so for those volunteers, I have a couple volunteers during the week who come in and help me prepare little baskets of
Right.
materials
Right.
where everything that they need to do 2 activities related to the lesson is
Mhm.
in that little basket. And all they
Right.
have to do is just follow the instructions. And
Right.
so, even within our ministry, we have both of those
Right.
dependent on the volunteer structure for that particular ministry time.
Right.
And so knowing how your material is set up
Mhm.
and the kinds of things that you will need to adapt, because again, no material is perfectly written for your church. So
Right.
if you can look at it and say, man, we really want music, but this material doesn't include music, but it's not going to be hard for me to supplement that.
Right.
Or, like in my case, okay, we're going to have rotating once a month volunteers who are just going to walk in the Sunday of and just teach what we provide. And
Mhm.
so some of that is like, okay, does our materials have the kind of activities already planned that we can
Mhm.
just, boom, boom, get ready for those volunteers? Do we need to
Right.
supplement those activities? Do you want materials that have video elements? Some people love them, some people hate them, and it's
Right.
fine. You can feel either way.
Right.
But is that something you want or don't want? Is that something you'll need to
Mhm.
supplement? Is that something that you will appreciate and enjoy using with your curriculum? And so,
Right.
looking at it with an eye for, okay, what are the resources, the supplemental materials that this curriculum provides or does not provide? What's kind of its basic expectations of the teacher and their teaching style? And how is all that going to mesh with the expectations and the needs of our ministry?
Right. And so that's where that taking that time to kind of look. And the great thing about it is that every publisher is going to give you some sample material if you request it. You know, if you want to get a bunch of different material and take a look at it and spend some time, with it and looking at how it's laid out, they will, email you that, and then you can always, unsubscribe afterwards if you didn't like it. Don't feel like you're tied into having to hear from them forever. If that's but take some time to get some samples from some different places and take a look at the way they offer the material, how their style is, kind of saying, yeah, this is something that's going to work for us, or this is something that's not. But it's taking that time to try to decide, what is going to be best for my ministry, because what is best for my ministry may not be what's best for Virginia's ministry, because we might be in completely different style churches, different denominations, different goals, different communities. So, somebody might recommend something to you, but you want to make sure that it's going to fit what your needs are and what your volunteers' needs are. Because quite honestly, we want to make this as easy on our volunteers as we can, because we need them. So, we want to find something that's going to be very volunteer friendly.
And speaking of volunteers, so our student and children's ministry recently shifted some of their materials, into using some new things. And I had a couple of my kind of key leaders and key teachers. We kind of did a test run with it during some special services that we had, some special revival services. I'm like, hey, two of my strongest teachers, take a look at this. Let's all three look at this sample that I got of this new material, and let's see what we think. Let's see if we think this is going to be a good fit for our ministry. And so, having some of your teachers who love the ministry, are invested, also taking a look at that curriculum or that material with you,
Right.
And getting their feedback on it. And some people have their thing that they love and they aren't ever going to want to switch it. But some people would welcome the opportunity to try something new, see what's out there, and see if maybe it would be a better fit for your ministry or not.
Right. Because ultimately, the material that you're choosing and the curriculum that you're designing is your responsibility. And so as the children's minister, as the children's director, you are responsible for making that final decision, but don't feel like you're doing it all on your own. Bring in some helpful people, bring in some of your volunteers, maybe bring in some educators. If you have educators in your church that maybe even if they don't teach with you in children's ministry, but maybe they're a public school teacher, having them come and give you their insight, is helpful. Finding, people that can help give you feedback is huge. And so, you can let them know, this is not a committee that is making the decision, because ultimately the decision is yours. But I would like your input. I would like your help. I would like your, opinion on it. And, make sure that you take the time to do that, because it's very worth it just to have somebody else's perspective, especially if they've been teaching, volunteering in your ministry for a long time. They have that experience behind them. Let them give you, their feedback as well.
And ultimately too, this is oftentimes not an easy, quick, or cheap decision.
No.
And so, so if you are considering changing curriculum, give yourself time to research and to feel like you're comfortable with your understanding of the different options, and don't feel rushed to make that decision, because if you aren't comfortable with it, then you do make a hefty financial investment, then sometimes you're like, oh no, like we're stuck with this.
Yes.
So don't be afraid to take your time with this decision, get input from others, and make it very thoughtfully and prayerfully. So.
Right. This might be a good time for you to plan on attending a conference, maybe going to a a CPC, a Children's Pastors Conference, a Kids Matter, an ETCH, your denominational conferences, because they have these large rooms set up in all of these large conferences where you can go and you can talk to representatives from different publishers, where they will actually hand you boxes or hard copies or books that have the information about their material. And it's going to give you it's really worth the price of admission to be able to look at multiple things at one time, and to really be able to ask the questions that you have to a person that's there just to do this, just to give you their information, and it gives you that contact. And so I think it's well worth it if you're looking at making a big move for you to attend one of those conferences, just to be able to do that, if for no other reason, but just to be able to have everybody in one big room for you to do that. But also, I think it's very, very beneficial for you to talk with other children's ministers.
Absolutely.
Find out what kind of material they use, why they love what they have. A lot of times they will loan you old copies of their material where you can look. Because for me, a lot of times when I would be at a church that didn't have the budget to purchase material, I would have larger churches that would be kind enough to give me like a leader's guides from their material that they had already used, so that I would have material. It might not be dated the right dates. I might even have to kind of adjust if there's a holiday in the material, but it did give me the doctrinal information I needed. It gave me the writing, it gave me the activities. And so I was able to build from there. So, there's a lot of large churches that are very willing to share their material, because there's only so much storage space in a building. And so there's only so much we can hold on to. So there were always times when I was at a larger church that I would be gifting material to churches that didn't have the budget to be able to purchase something brand new. But I think that it's, making sure that you do your due diligence to talk to people and ask them, how do you like this material? Why did you switch to this? Why did you leave this? To kind of get input from other people to get a good idea on, what's going to be most beneficial for your church. Well, this has been a fun conversation, Dr. Virginia. I enjoy talking material and curriculum so much. And so we hope that it's been helpful. We hope that it's given you a starting place, a chance to kind of think through some of the big issues as you're thinking about making the switch. So we hope that this has met you where you are and that it's been helpful. That is our heart. We just enjoy talking with each other so much, and we enjoy including you in the conversation, and hopefully that we're being helpful. If you have any questions, any specific things that you'd like us to cover, any follow-up questions from this particular episode, we would love to hear from you. Please send us an email, send us a note, make a comment. We would love to find out what you're thinking about, what you're concerned about, and what your needs are, so that we can better serve you. We just thank you so much for taking time with us today, and we look forward to talking to you again soon. Bye-bye.